Today we will continue with our Braille discussion. It's what everyone's talking about, Part 2. Any examples provided are fictional scenarios to assist in the decision-making process. Each student is unique and instruction should be tailored to meet the needs of each individual student. Not all possible examples have been provided. Included in Public Law 105-17 is a specific provision in the law about Braille instruction for visually impaired students. The Braille provision, as it is sometimes called, was added when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, was reauthorized in 1997 and was continued in the 2004 reauthorization. All visual impairment eligible students are required to be taught Braille unless you have evidence of why Braille is not needed. Braille use and instruction for all students identified as having visual impairment, including blindness, until the IEP team determines that Braille is not appropriate for the child. This is based upon evaluation of the child's current and future reading and writing needs. It means that the IEP team is obligated to assume, even before an evaluation is conducted, that Braille instruction will be a necessary service for the blind or visually impaired child. This is an important shift from the past educational practices, when it was routinely assumed that children with some usable vision would read print and only be provided with Braille instruction as a last resort. Does this mean that visually impaired children who might have sufficient vision to read enlarged print or regular print with magnification shall also be provided with Braille instruction and the opportunity to use Braille? Yes, unless, of course, as the provision states, an evaluation that takes into consideration the child's future need for Braille literacy demonstrates that Braille is not appropriate. And how do we determine that? Is through the LMA, or Learning Media Assessment. In Part 1, we talked about how to begin conducting an LMA and example determination statements for the IEP. Today we will begin with IEP documentation. When completing an IEP for a student determined eligible for visual impairment services, you must answer a few questions. Is the child blind or visually impaired? Is instruction in Braille needed, which means that you will have goals, objectives, benchmarks to teach the Braille code? Is the use of Braille needed? And will Braille be the student's primary mode of communication? For these questions, you will obtain information from your LMA to explain why. That means why you have answered that they will need the Braille instruction or the use of Braille is needed, or if Braille is the primary mode of communication. For math and science, the student will need either Unified English Braille with UEB only or Unified English Braille with the Nemeth code. This depends on the type of Braille instruction that you are providing. Either state information from the FLMA that justifies your decisions, or state the following. If yes, Braille instruction will be integrated through all classroom activities. How Braille is appropriate and how it will be taught. If the answer is no, the absence of Braille will not impact the student's ability to read and write. Include FLMA information in the present levels as applicable. When addressing special factors for students that may not be currently learning the Braille code, the team will need to discuss who will be providing the instruction. If the TVI has a goal that is related to Braille instruction or will at some point be learning the code, then Braille is appropriate. This includes pre-Braille and tactile instruction as needed. If the TVI is supporting tactile exposure, but instruction is being provided by the classroom teacher, Braille is not appropriate. This is when we use tactile as an accommodation or no direct instruction is needed. A sample statement when Braille is needed. Based on current functional vision and learning media assessment results, dated March 13th, 2020. The student has a primary sensory learning channel of tactile with secondary sensory learning channel of auditory and requires Braille instruction to access their curriculum. Braille instruction will be integrated through all classroom activities. It will be addressed through goals, accommodations, and services. It would be appropriate, in keeping with the intent of the Braille provision, for the IEP team to discuss and or reassess this decision annually. Special factor sample statement when Braille is needed. Based on current functional vision and learning media assessment results dated March 12, 2020, the student has dual primary sensory learning channels of tactile and visual with a secondary learning channel of auditory. Student is being taught both Braille and access to print as dual reading mediums. Braille instruction will be integrated through all classroom activities. It will be addressed through goals, accommodations, and services. Special factor sample statement when Braille is needed for progressive vision loss. Based on current functional vision learning media assessment results dated March 14, 2020, the student has a primary sensory learning channel of visual with secondary learning channels of auditory and tactual. Due to the possibility of further vision loss, Braille is being taught as a secondary reading medium during direct instruction. Braille will be addressed through goals, accommodations, and services. Sample statement for a visual learner. Based on current functional vision and learning media assessment results dated March 12, 2020, the student has a primary sensory learning channel of visual with a secondary learning channel of auditory. The student is able to access 14-point font at 12 inches and below 14 font using magnification. Print is an efficient reading medium at this time. The absence of Braille will not impact the student's ability to read and write. Sample statement for a student who has a physical and/or cognitive impairment that makes accessing Braille more difficult. The absence of Braille will not impact the student's ability to read and write. The student is a pre- or non-reader and does not meet the indicators needed for Braille instruction at this time. While Braille instruction is not appropriate at this time, use of tactile objects or materials may be beneficial for the learning and understanding of classroom concepts. The learning media assessment results indicate that auditory is the primary channel of gaining information, with visual and tactual being secondary. While they will visually look at objects, she is typically more motivated by sound she hears and when objects move, vibrate, and/or appear to move. Print materials should be presented in large font size with high contrast and/or tactile components. Sample statement for a student who is learning pre-Braille but not currently learning the Braille code. If the student has pre-Braille goals in the IEP, then Braille instruction will be integrated through all classroom activities. The student has a diagnosis of optic nerve hypoplasia, or ONH, in both eyes and significant visual limitations. Learning media results indicate that student's primary sensory channel is vision, but she pairs it with either auditory and/or tactile to give a better sense of what is in her environment. Because of her limited vision and her need to use tactile skills to gain information, it is appropriate for the student to begin pre-Braille instruction. This includes using the Braille writer, tracking tactile dots and/or Braille, and learning various positional concepts. Due to her age, she may not begin officially learning the code, but will have exposure to it and help her as she transitions to kindergarten. Ongoing learning media assessments will determine her continued need for Braille instruction. During the ARC, or Admissions and Release Committee meeting for the child, the team should discuss the following: how instruction in Braille will be implemented through integration with other classroom activities. What will the specific goals written to address Braille instruction include? that also need to include the competency level or the baseline data. What will the specific accommodations related to Braille and tactile materials needed to access the curriculum be? And when discussing services, you must specify the number of minutes that will be provided to the child. It should be documented within the IEP and the conference summary how each will be addressed to meet the needs of the student. For students who will not require Braille instruction and will continue to be print readers, the team should discuss the literacy media the student will use for reading and writing. Will it be regular print, print with magnification, large print? Document the preferred font size for given task. Document the distance for reading and writing task, including near and distance, and short task and longer task. These should be documented within the IEP and the conference summary on how the ARC determines to meet the needs of the student. Before beginning the Braille code, pre-Braille skills must be evaluated and taught. They must be determined by the needs of the student and long-term expectation of progress. This is where the data for baseline during our FVLMA will be used to determine the goals needed. You will also determine a need for the following: Braille writing, Braille reading, whether they are learning the Braille code and how fluent they are in reading, whether they will learn Nemeth or UEB. Will it be addressed after the student has a baseline understanding of literacy code? And start this as early as possible. Each district sets the standards for the number of goals and benchmarks that they require. Please refer to your district's policy. You may have multiple goals, but do not try to teach the whole code in one academic year.